I'm trying to think, but yeah, there have been first-time writers who've won the Pulitzer. This is your first book, and you've been an investment banker for the longest time. What do you think made people connect to your book so much?
I think two things.
From responses you've got.
Yeah, two things. One, timing. It came. I submitted the manuscript the week before Lehman went under. It came out just when the crisis was at its worst, and people wanted a simple account of what had happened. And it turns out to have been much easier to get a simple account of what happened of the previous crisis, and they could draw the analogies. The second is, I think, the way I told the story through people, and not focusing on the sort of the minutiae of financial markets. I think that registered with people.
And as you were working on this book, did the impending crash that was there, I mean, in your current scheme of things, become more and more imminent? Did you foresee it to a certain extent? Did you foresee the magnitude of it?
I certainly didn't foresee it or the magnitude. Otherwise, I'd be a lot richer. What I did foresee was that we were going to have crises. And the one thing I did sort of struck me when I was writing the book. I was writing it from 2004 to 2008. That was the bubble years. And I was doing a lot of research on the 1920s. And the parallels between what I was writing about in the 1920s and what was happening when I opened the papers every day were just eerie. So I had a sense of déjà vu that the world was, we're repeating something that's happened before. I wish I'd foreseen the magnitude of what would happen, because I'd be flying around in my own jet. I'm not.
Liaquat, when it comes to Asia or India, who would you say are the Asian or the Indian lords of finance?
Oh, God. I think you probably stumped me a bit there, because I don't really know enough about sort of the key the key players. I mean, I know a lot of the key policy makers, Montague,
but do you think there are key players here as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, inherently, economic policy making is inherently, you've got one or two individuals who pull levers that affect a lot of people. I mean, it's sort of, they're like the generals in an army. And if they make the right decisions, it's good for a lot of people. And if they make the wrong decisions, it's bad for a lot of people. So it's astounding how much impact economic policy makers have. And it is astounding how much power is concentrated in relatively few hands. So let's take the governor of the central bank, the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. He can have an enormous impact. And ultimately, the buck stops with him. And if he makes the right decisions, that's great.
For the sake of people who might not have read your book, what are some of the key similarities between what happened then and what happened now?
Okay, the key similarity is the lead up, which is during the 2000s were a decade that almost mirrored the 1920s. In both cases, we got over easy credit, central bank making a big mistake. In both cases, the over easy credit led to over borrowing. Then it was European countries, European banks, stock market players. This time it was US and UK households and Spanish households buying real estate, financial institutions, and again, European countries. In both cases, the overborrowing did not lead to inflation, but to an asset bubble. Then it was in the stock market, this time it was in real estate. In both cases, the bubble burst, as they always do, and the bursting bubble and the ensuing economic downturn in both cases led to a banking crisis.
Right.
Then it was sort of the a run on banks, people lining up outside banks to take their money out. This time the run on banks was a digital run,
Right.
where large institutions pulled their money out of other financial
Right.
institutions with the click of a mouse. And that was the run that brought down Bear Stearns. That was the
Right.
run that brought down Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. That
Right.
was the run that brought down Fortis, the European bank. That was
Right.
the run that brought down
Right.
Lehman.
Right.
The difference, of course, is in the reactions.
Right.
Then they allowed, the authorities then took a very sick patient and
Right.
essentially killed the patient.
Right.
This time around, they've done the exact opposite. They've given the patient extremely strong medicine.
Right.
They saved the banking system, they flooded the system with money,
Right.
they've cut, allowed budget deficits to expand by
Right.
cutting taxes
Right.
and increasing government expenditure.
Right.
So those similarities have made, those differences have made all the
Right.
difference.
Right. When it comes to budget deficit expansion, that comes with a lot of problems as well. That's what a lot of people are saying, that there are a lot of problems that will occur in the long run. What problems do you see when it comes to budget deficit expansion, and how can they be dealt with possibly?
Look, budget deficits were necessary to prevent a Great Depression.
Right.
But it's pretty strong medicine.
Right.
And like a lot of strong medicine,
Right.
it has some
Side
bad side
effects.
effects.
Right.
And the key side effects are that eventually it sucks up the world's savings
Right.
unproductively and harms private investment. So you can only have budget deficits as a temporary way, sort of like a tow truck to pull you out of a ditch.
Right.
And the risk is that they keep these budget deficits for too long. So that's the one risk. The second is that even if you get a recovery and they're temporary,
Right.
the stock of debt in some cases has become so large that the taxes that will have to be imposed
Right.
eventually
Right.
in order to pay the interest on
Right.
those debts is going to harm economic growth.
Right.
Because whenever the government imposes taxes, it creates a whole lot of disincentive effects.
Exactly.
In both cases, I think both of those problems are manageable. So I don't think we're at a
Right.
tipping point
Right.
where this is going to be a serious problem in the U.S. nor in most of Europe. I do think it's obviously become a serious problem in Greece.
Right.
And yeah, there's a third issue which I didn't raise, which is at times government debt gets so large that no one has any confidence you'll be able to, or you'll be willing to pay it back in the future.
Right.
And therefore you have a debt crisis. And that's what you have in Greece, and that's what you have in Ireland.
Right.
You don't have that in the US.
Right. Like you said, it's not a serious problem right now, but it's something that governments must watch. It's something that governments must relook at. So how does one draw the line? I mean, when it comes to the regulators, what do they have to do to make sure that, okay, I'm not just forgetting about this, but I'm saying, okay, this is the time when I have to take that call. How does the regulator take that call?
It's, look, it's an art, not a science.
Right.
They're juggling a lot of balls.
Right.
The most important thing is that they think they need to keep on with some degree of fiscal stimulus, i.e. budget deficits,
Right.
because unemployment is obstinately high
Exactly.
and it's not coming down. So, and to some degree I sympathize with that. So I think, the idea that they can cut the budget deficit in the next couple of years very sharply is probably mistaken.
Right.
And I'm talking about the US. And it's important to say every country is different. So
Right.
getting the balance right,
Right.
is very different. If it lasts more than a couple of years,
Right.
I think we'll have to come to the conclusion that unemployment is a structural problem. Small countries have one advantage over very large countries.
Right.
Small countries can export their way out out of the hole. That's not available to the U.S. The U.S. is too large to be able to export its way out of its hole.
Right. Do you foresee a crisis, another crisis today? Do you see something else happening in the next couple of years? Are there certain sectors which you feel must be watched?
I'm going to give you a tongue-in-cheek answer, which is I have an infallible indicator of crises, which is whenever any country tries to build the tallest building in the world, that is an immediate sign that you will get a financial crisis. 1929, the Empire State Building. 1997, the Petronas Towers, followed by the Asian crisis. 2009, Dubai, the Burj Al Arab.
Interesting, actually. I mean,
2012, Shanghai. Watch that. But financial crises are by definition unpredictable. But I've given you the best indicator I have.
Is there another book you're working on right now?
I am. I'm unfortunately not working on it, but I should be. I've contracted. It's another economic history story set in the 1830s. I'm going further back in time. And it's about the conflict between Wall Street and Washington. The president, Andrew Jackson, taking on the central bank being run by a guy with a tin political ear. It's sort of full of big personalities. And the trick is going to be, can I make even the far distant parts come alive?
And is that going to have parallels?
The main point of the book is that anti-banker sentiment has a long and distinguished history in the U.S. And they've made some really quite crazy decisions in the past based on sort of run by, if you get a populist president. And we don't currently have a populist president, but we could easily if the Republicans came to power. And then my book would be very
relevant.
timely.
That's a little scary, actually, because considering how your last book became so relevant when it came out.
Even I don't want that to happen.
On that note, thank you so much, Liaquat.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Fabulous talking to you.
Well, that was Tilke's sort of claim to fame, right? Investigative journalism.
Absolutely.
Okay. So if
That's
I see you
something
trailing me, I'll know that.